The fortress of Valdron rose from the mist like a beast carved from black stone. Eloin stood at the iron gates, her single leather satchel clutched against her chest, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Name? The guard's voice was sharp, impatient. Eloin Ashford. I'm the new chambermaid. He looked her over with barely concealed contempt. A human, his expression said. Another desperate soul willing to serve wolves for coin. He wasn't wrong. Her mother's medicine cost more than pride could afford. 3 months of work here would cover an entire winter's treatment. She only needed to survive 3 months. Through the courtyard. Ask for Marin in the east wing. And girl? He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. Keep your head down. The Alpha King doesn't tolerate mistakes. Eloin nodded and slipped through the gates before her courage could fail her. Inside, Valdron was even more imposing. Massive stone corridors stretched in every direction, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across walls adorned with ancient tapestries. Wolves in human form moved past her without acknowledgement, their golden eyes sliding over her as though she were invisible. Perhaps that was safest. She found Marin in the servants' quarters, a stern-faced woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and hands that looked like they had scrubbed 1,000 floors. You're late, Marin said without preamble. The mountain pass was... I don't care. You're here now. Rules are simple. Clean what you're told. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never enter the Alpha's private chambers without explicit summons. Never look him in the eye. Never, under any circumstances, touch him. Marin's gaze hardened. Do you understand? Eloin swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Good. You'll start in the Great Hall. The Alpha hosts his war council tonight. Everything must be immaculate. The Great Hall was cavernous, designed to intimidate. Eloin worked in silence, polishing silver candlesticks and sweeping stone floors while other servants bustled around her. Through the tall windows, she watched the sun sink toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She was adjusting a tapestry near the dais when the doors crashed open. He entered like a storm-given form. Alpha King Cale of Valdron was nothing like the soft nobles Eloin had seen in her village. He was tall, brutally so, with shoulders that seemed carved from the same black stone as his fortress. His hair was dark as midnight, swept back from a face that could have been beautiful if not for the coldness in his pale gray eyes. A scar traced a path from his left temple down to his jaw, disappearing beneath the high collar of his black coat. The wolves in the hall immediately lowered their heads. Eloin quickly followed suit, pressing herself against the wall, praying to become invisible. Cale strode to the head of the long table, his beta close behind. The beta, a golden-haired wolf named Cormac, was speaking rapidly, gesturing toward a map spread across the table. The eastern border. Theron's wolves were spotted again last night. 3 of them, maybe 4. They're testing our defenses. Cale said nothing. He stood with his back to the room, studying the map with frightening intensity. My king? Cormac pressed. What are your orders? Silence. Eloin watched from behind the pillar, confused by the tension that suddenly thickened the air. Why wasn't he answering? The other wolves exchanged glances, shifting uncomfortably. Then Cormac did something strange. He moved around the table until he stood directly in Cale's line of sight. Only then did the Alpha respond, his deep voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Double the patrols. No one crosses without my knowledge. The council continued, but Eloin barely heard the words. She was watching, studying. Every time someone spoke to the Alpha King from behind or from the side, there was that same pause, that same moment of stillness before Cormac subtly redirected the speaker into Cale's eyeline. It can't be, she thought. Surely not. The meeting ended. Wolves filed out in disciplined silence. Eloin remained frozen behind her pillar as the hall slowly emptied. She thought she was alone. She was wrong. You. The voice was ice and gravel, and it came from directly behind her. Elowyn spun to find Cale standing 3 feet away, his silver gaze boring into her with an intensity that stopped her breath. Up close, he was even more terrifying. She could smell pine and wood smoke and something wild beneath. He towered over her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. I'm sorry, my king. She dropped into a clumsy curtsy. I was just finishing the cleaning. He didn't respond. His eyes moved across her face, her lips, with an attention that felt almost physical. He's reading me, she realized with sudden horrible clarity. He's reading my lips because he can't hear my words. The Alpha King of Valdron, the most feared wolf in the Northern Territories, was deaf. And he knew that she knew. His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist like iron shackles. He pulled her close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his pale stare, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, meant for her, alone. One word of this to anyone, little maid, and I will tear out your throat myself. Elowyn couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She could only stare into those merciless eyes and understand, with crystalline clarity, that her life had just become tangled with a secret that could bring down a kingdom. He released her wrist and walked away without looking back. Elowyn stood alone in the empty hall, trembling, her skin still burning where he had touched her. There was no going back now. Sleep did not come that night. Elowyn lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over, the iron grip of his fingers, the cold fury in his eyes, the whispered threat that had sounded less like words and more like a death sentence. One word of this to anyone, and I will tear out your throat myself. She believed him. Completely. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the small window, Elowyn had made a decision. She would do her work, keep her head down, and speak to no one. In 3 months, she would have earned enough coin to pay for her mother's medicine. She only needed to survive 3 months. Surely she could manage that. The morning passed in a blur of scrubbing and polishing. Marin assigned her to the East Wing corridors, far from the Alpha's private chambers. A mercy, Elowyn thought. Perhaps the old woman had seen her terror and taken pity. But mercy, it seemed, had limits. The Alpha has requested fresh linens in his study, Marin announced that afternoon, her tone brooking no argument. You'll deliver them. Elowyn's blood turned to ice. Me? Surely one of the more experienced. He asked for you specifically. The words hung in the air like a noose. Elowyn climbed the winding stairs to the Alpha's tower with a stack of linens pressed against her chest like a shield. Each step felt like walking toward her own execution. What did he want? To ensure her silence through fear? To finish what his threat had started? The door to his study was slightly ajar. She knocked once, twice. No response. Of course not, she realized. He wouldn't hear it. She pushed the door open slowly. The study was larger than her entire home had been, lined with books and maps and strange artifacts from lands she couldn't name. A fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting warm light across rich carpets and heavy wooden furniture. Kyle stood at the window with his back to her, silhouetted against the gray mountain sky. Elowyn cleared her throat. Nothing. She took 3 steps forward, and a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. He turned instantly, his body coiling with predatory tension. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Relief? Annoyance? Before the cold mask slammed back into place. The linens, my king. She held them up, then felt foolish. He could see that perfectly well. He gestured toward a chest near the bed. She moved to place them there, acutely aware of his gaze tracking her every movement. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. You haven't told anyone. It wasn't a question. Ilowen faced him, forcing herself to meet those winter-pale eyes. No, my king. Why? The question caught her off guard. She had expected more threats, more intimidation. Not this quiet curiosity. Because it's not my secret to tell, she said simply. Something shifted in his expression. The ice cracked, just for a moment, revealing something raw and almost vulnerable beneath. Then it was gone, and he was the fearsome Alpha King once more. You're either very brave or very stupid, little maid. Perhaps both, my king. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, and Elowen felt something flutter unexpectedly in her chest. Dangerous, she warned herself. This is dangerous. You will attend me in the mornings, he said abruptly. Bring my correspondence. Nothing else changes. My king, I don't think... It wasn't a request. He turned back to the window, dismissing her. Elowen fled the study with her pulse racing. She had wanted to stay invisible, to survive her 3 months in peace. Instead, she had been pulled directly into the Alpha King's orbit. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was that some small, reckless piece of her wasn't sorry at all. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Each morning, Elowen climbed the tower stairs with the Alpha's correspondence, letters from allied pacts, reports from border patrols, petitions from wolves seeking audience. She would place them on his desk, and he would read them in silence while she waited. At first, she stood rigid by the door, eager to leave as quickly as possible. But Kale seemed in no hurry to dismiss her. He would ask questions about the letters, about the names and seals she recognized, and slowly, reluctantly, Elowen began to answer. This one bears the mark of the Blackmore pack, she said one morning, pointing to a letter sealed with a wolf's head in black wax. They've written 3 times this week. Kale's jaw tightened. Theron grows bold. Theron? The Alpha of Blackmore. My cousin. The word dripped with contempt. He believes the throne should have been his. Elowen processed this carefully. And now he tests your borders. He tests my weakness. Kale's eyes met hers, and she saw the weight behind them. One sign that I am unfit to rule, and he will bring war to Valdron's gates. Understanding dawned cold and sharp. This was why the secret mattered so much. A deaf alpha was a vulnerable alpha. In a world where wolves valued strength above all else, Kale's condition wasn't just a personal burden, it was an existential threat to his entire pack. No one suspects, she said quietly. In the Great Hall, during the council, no one seemed to know. Cormac knows. Marin knows. His gaze held hers. And now you. 3 people. The Alpha King's deepest vulnerability was protected by only 3 people, and she was now one of them. The responsibility settled onto her shoulders like a physical weight. I won't betray you, she whispered. Everyone betrays eventually. I'm not everyone. The words came out fiercer than she intended. Kyle's eyes widened slightly, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Wind howled against the tower windows. And something unspoken passed between them, fragile as spider silk, strong as iron chains. Then Kale moved. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and suddenly he was close, far too close, his body nearly brushing against hers. Elowen's back pressed against the cold stone wall. Her breath came fast and shallow. You confuse me, little maid, he murmured. His hand rose to trace the line of her jaw, his touch feather-light and burning hot. You should fear me. Everyone fears me. I do fear you, she admitted. And yet you stay. You speak to me without trembling. You look me in the eye when others can barely stand in my presence. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Elowen's knees nearly buckled. Why? Because... Her voice failed her. She swallowed hard, tried again. Because I see you. Not the Alpha King. You. Something broke behind his eyes. For one heartbeat, the mask fell away completely, and Eloan saw the man beneath. Lonely, exhausted, longing for someone to see him as more than a crown and a threat. His head dipped toward hers. She felt his breath against her lips, smelled pine and smoke, and something wild that made her wolfless heart race. Then the door crashed open. "My king!" Cormac's voice was urgent, panicked. "The eastern border. Theron's wolves have crossed. They've taken prisoners." Kyle stepped back from Eloan so quickly it was as though she had burned him. The cold mask slammed back into place, and suddenly he was the Alpha King again, all ice and fury. "How many?" he demanded, already moving toward the door. "At least a dozen. They're holding them at the river crossing." Kyle paused at the threshold. He didn't turn around, didn't look at her, but his voice reached her clearly. "Stay in the fortress. Do not leave for any reason." Then he was gone, and Eloan was left alone with her racing heart and the ghost of his almost kiss still burning on her lips. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to steady herself. What was happening to her? He was the Alpha King, a wolf, a predator who had threatened her life less than a week ago. She was a human maid, a nobody, someone who should mean nothing to him. But that look in his eyes, that moment of raw vulnerability, it haunted her. And deep down, in a place she didn't dare examine too closely, she knew she was already lost. Cal returned at nightfall. Eloan heard the commotion from the servants' quarters, wolves shouting, boots thundering across stone, the great doors groaning open. She told herself to stay put. He had ordered her to remain in the fortress, not to come running like some lovesick fool. But when Marin burst in with blood on her apron and panic in her eyes, Eloan's resolve crumbled. The Alpha is wounded. Cormac needs assistance. Now. Eloan followed without thinking, her feet carrying her through corridors and up winding stairs until she reached Cale's private chambers. The scene inside stopped her cold. Cale sat on the edge of his bed, shirtless, his torso wrapped in makeshift bandages already soaked through with crimson. Cormac stood beside him, arguing in rapid whispers that the Alpha clearly couldn't see from his angle. "Need the physician. This is beyond what I can—" "No physician," Kyle growled. "You're bleeding out." I said no. Eloan understood instantly. A physician would examine him, speak to him, discover the truth. Cale would rather bleed to death than risk exposure. "I can help." Both men turned. Cormac's expression flickered between relief and suspicion. Cale's face was unreadable, but his pale gaze found hers and held. "She knows herbs," Marin said from behind Eloan. "Her mother was a healer before the sickness took her mind." It wasn't quite true. Her mother was still alive, still fighting. But Eloan didn't correct her. She moved to Cale's side, her hands steady even as her heart raced. "I need hot water, clean cloth, and whatever yarrow and comfrey you have in the stores." Cormac hesitated, glancing at his Alpha. Something unspoken passed between them, and then the Beta nodded and disappeared with Marin. Alone with Kyle, Eloan allowed herself to breathe. "This will hurt," she said, positioning herself in his line of sight. "I need to clean the wound before I can stitch it." "I've had worse." She didn't doubt it. Up close, she could see the map of scars across his chest and arms, a lifetime of battles written on his skin. But this wound was deep, a jagged slash across his ribs that still seeped blood with every breath. "What happened?" she asked as she worked. "Theron's wolves, an ambush at the river. The prisoners. Safe. My wolves got them out." His jaw tightened as she pressed cloth to the wound. "But Theron wanted me to know he could reach me." This was a message. Eloan's hands stilled. "He's coming for you. He's been coming for me since the day I took the throne." Kyle's voice was quiet, tired. "My father chose me as heir over him. Theron has never forgiven it. Because of your—" She hesitated. My deafness? A bitter smile twisted his lips. No. My father was the only one who knew, and he kept my secret until his death. Theron simply believes he is the stronger wolf. Perhaps he's right. He's not. The words came out before she could stop them. Kale's eyes snapped to her face, searching. You don't know that? I know that strength isn't just about hearing or fighting. Elowyn resumed her work, threading the needle with practiced fingers. I know that you've led this pack for 5 years without anyone discovering the truth. I know that your wolves would die for you. That doesn't happen for weak leaders. Silence stretched between them. When she finally looked up, Kyle was watching her with an expression she couldn't name. You're remarkable, he said softly. Do you know that? Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm just a maid. No. His hand caught hers, stilling her movements. You're not. The moment hung suspended, fragile as glass. Alawan could feel his pulse beneath her fingers, could see the firelight dancing in his winter-pale eyes. She wanted to lean closer, wanted to know what his lips would feel like against hers. Instead, she pulled back. The wound needs stitching, she whispered. Hold still. She worked in silence after that, but something had shifted between them. When her fingers brushed his skin, he didn't flinch. When she tied off the final stitch, his hand rose to cup her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Thank you, Elowyn. It was the first time he had used her name. She left his chambers with her heart in her throat and the ghost of his touch burning on her skin. She didn't see the rider who had arrived at the fortress gates under cover of darkness, a scout from Blackmoor, bearing news that Theron himself was mere days away. The wolves of Blackmoor arrived 3 days later. Alawan watched from an upper window as they rode through the fortress gates, their black banners snapping in the wind. At their head rode a man who could only be Theron, tall and golden-haired, beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and cold, gleaming steel. Diplomatic envoy, Marin muttered beside her, disgust dripping from every syllable. As if anyone believes that. Why would the Alpha allow him inside the walls? Because refusing would be an act of war, and Theron knows it. Marin's hand gripped Elowyn's shoulder. Stay away from them, girl. Those wolves are not like ours. They're cruel, for the pleasure of it. The warning proved prescient. That evening, a feast was held in the Great Hall. Tradition demanded hospitality, even for enemies. Elowyn was assigned to serve wine, a task that kept her circulating among the tables, invisible in the way servants always were, but not invisible to everyone. Theron sat at Kale's right hand as protocol required. He was charming, solicitous, every word dripping with false friendship. And his eyes, pale gold like dying sunlight, kept drifting toward Elowyn. She felt his gaze like insects crawling across her skin. Halfway through the feast, Theron rose with his goblet raised. A toast, he announced, his voice carrying easily across the hall. To my dear cousin Kale, Alpha King of Valdron. The wolves raised their cups. Elowyn noticed Kale's slight delay, the way his eyes found Cormac before he lifted his own goblet. Theron noticed too. She saw his smile sharpen. Tell me, cousin, Theron continued, still standing. Have you given more thought to my proposal? An alliance between our packs would make us unstoppable. I have considered it, Kale replied carefully. And I find your terms unfavorable. Theron's laugh was musical and entirely without warmth. Unfavorable? I offer you my sister as a mate, the combined strength of our armies, and you find it unfavorable? Your sister deserves better than a political arrangement. How noble. Theron circled behind Kale's chair and Elowyn's blood went cold. He was positioning himself outside Kale's line of sight deliberately. But perhaps there's another reason you refuse. Perhaps the mighty Alpha King has already found someone who interests him. His pale eyes locked onto Elowyn across the hall. The little human maid, for instance. Theron's voice dropped to a purr that somehow still carried. She seems quite devoted to you, cousin. Always watching. Always waiting. Kale's hands tightened on his goblet, but he couldn't respond to words he hadn't heard. Eloin acted on instinct. She stepped forward, deliberately dropping her wine pitcher with a spectacular crash. Every eye in the hall turned to her, including Kyle's. "Forgive me, my king." She dropped into a deep curtsy. "I'm so terribly clumsy." The moment gave Kale time to turn, to see Theron standing behind him, to read the situation. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "Theron, sit down." It wasn't a request. The command resonated with alpha power, and even Theron's wolves shifted uncomfortably. For a heartbeat, challenge flickered in Theron's golden eyes. Then he smiled and returned to his seat. "Of course, cousin, forgive my wandering." But as Eloin knelt to clean the spilled wine, Theron leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Interesting reflexes for a simple maid. One might think you were protecting him from something." His breath was hot against her ear. "I wonder what secrets you're keeping, little human. I wonder what my cousin is hiding." Elowin's hands trembled as she gathered broken pottery. "I don't know what you mean, my lord." "No?" Theron's fingers caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then let me be clear. I will discover the truth. And when I do, you will wish you had never come to Valdron." He released her and turned away. Across the hall, Kale's pale stare found hers. He had seen the exchange, seen Theron touch her, and the fury in his expression was barely contained. Later that night, a summons came to the servants' quarters. Elowin climbed the tower stairs with dread pooling in her stomach. She found Kale pacing before the fire, his movements tight with restrained violence. "What did he say to you?" She hesitated. "He suspects something. He doesn't know what yet, but he's watching you closely." "Let him watch." Kale's voice was rough. "I won't let him touch you again. I'm not important. Your secret. You are important." He crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Don't you understand? If he hurts you to get to me, I'll tear him apart with my bare hands and damn the consequences." Eloin stared up at him, her breath catching. "Why?" she whispered. "I'm just a human. I'm nothing to you." "You're everything." The words hung between them like a confession. Then Kale kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and urgent, a man drowning and finding air. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers, and Eloin kissed him back with all the longing she had tried so hard to deny. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, his eyes searched her face. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. "Not for... I just need you close. I need to know you're safe." She should have refused, should have remembered her place, her plans, the 3 months of quiet service that would save her mother. Instead, she took his hand and let him lead her to his bed. They didn't make love. He simply held her, his body curved around hers, his breath warm against her hair. And sometime in the darkest hours of the night, something shifted. Kale's lips pressed against the curve of her neck. Then came a sharp, searing pain that made her gasp. His teeth breaking skin, his mouth hot against her throat. Warmth flooded through her veins like liquid fire. Eloin's body arched against his, a cry escaping her lips, but he held her firmly, his arms an iron cage around her trembling form. The sensation was overwhelming, pain and pleasure tangled together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "Mine," he growled against her skin, the word vibrating through her blood. She didn't understand. Didn't understand why her blood sang and her soul seemed to recognize his. But as darkness pulled her under, she heard him whisper words in the old language, words that sounded like a prayer, a promise, a claim. Elowin slept, and everything changed. She woke alone. Gray morning light filtered through the tower windows. and Kale was gone. For a moment, Elowen wondered if she had dreamed it all. The kiss, the bed, the burning sensation at her neck. Then she touched her throat and felt the raised marks beneath her fingertips. 2 punctures, already healing, exactly where his teeth had pierced her skin. What did he do to me? Elowen stumbled to the mirror above the wash basin, pushing her hair aside with trembling hands. The marks were clear against her pale skin, shimmering faintly like moonlight caught beneath the surface. Panic clawed at her chest. She dressed quickly and fled the tower, searching for answers. The corridors seemed different somehow, colors brighter, sounds sharper. She could smell things she had never noticed before. Herbs drying in the kitchens below, pine smoke from distant fireplaces, the musk of wolves moving through the fortress. What is happening to me? She found Marin in the servants' quarters and pulled the older woman into a storage room. What's wrong, girl? You look like you've seen death itself. Elowen pulled her collar aside, revealing the marks. Marin's face went white. Where did you get those? Her voice was barely a whisper. The Alpha. Last night. Elowen's throat tightened. What did he do to me? Marin sank onto a crate as though her legs had given out. He marked you, she said finally. The fool. The absolute fool. Marked me? What does that mean? It means he's claimed you as his mate. Marin's eyes glistened. Among our kind, such a mark is sacred. It binds 2 souls together for eternity. But you're human, child. Humans aren't meant to bear a wolf's mark. Cold dread settled in Elowen's stomach. What happens to humans who are marked? Most die. The words fell like stones. The mark carries the wolf's essence, his very life force. A human body isn't built to contain such power. It burns them from the inside. The room seemed to tilt. Elowen pressed her hand against the wall. I'm going to die? I don't know. Marin gripped Elowen's shoulders. Some humans have survived. Very few. Those with something special in their blood, some latent gift or ancient lineage. Elowen thought of her mother, the healer, thought of the strange dreams she'd had as a child. Dreams of running through forests on 4 legs, dreams of howling at the moon. She had dismissed them as fantasies. I don't know, she whispered. As if to prove Marin's words about the bond, a wave of emotion crashed through Elowen. Fury, fear, desperation, feelings that weren't her own. Kale. Something was wrong with Kale. Where is he? She demanded. The Great Hall. Theron demanded a formal audience this morning. Despite her weakening body, the bond's urgency gave her strength. Elowen ran. She burst through the doors to find chaos. Wolves stood in rigid lines along the walls, their postures tense. At the center of the room, Kyle and Theron faced each other like 2 storms about to collide. Proof of your unfitness, Theron was saying, his voice ringing with triumph. The Alpha King of Valdron cannot even hear his own wolves speak. He's been deceiving the pack for years. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Shock, disbelief, and something darker. Doubt. It's a lie, Cormac snarled. Is it? Theron smiled coldly. Then let him prove it. Let him turn his back and respond to my words. Kale stood motionless, his face carved from stone. He couldn't hear the challenge. He didn't know what Theron was demanding. Elowen pushed through the crowd until she stood at Kale's side. Don't, she said, placing herself in his line of sight. Don't give him what he wants. Kale's eyes found hers, and through the bond she felt his anguish. His secret was exposed. Everything he had fought to protect was falling apart. Ah! Theron's voice dripped with mockery. The human maid comes to defend her master. How touching. He circled closer. Tell me, little human, how long have you been helping him maintain this pathetic charade? The Alpha's hearing has no bearing on his ability to lead, Elowen said, her voice carrying across the hall. He has protected this pack for 5 years. What more proof of fitness do you need? She speaks boldly for a human. Theron's smile turned predatory. But I noticed something interesting on her neck. Guards. Bring her forward. Rough hands seized Eloan's arms, dragging her toward Theron. He caught her chin and turned her head, exposing the mark. A claiming mark. On a human. He laughed. The deaf alpha has taken a human as his mate. This is better than I ever dreamed. Kale moved like lightning. One moment he was still. The next he had Theron by the throat, lifted off the ground, his claws pressing against the golden wolf's jugular. Touch her again, Kyle said, his voice barely human, and I will end your bloodline. Kill me, and my wolves will destroy Valdron, Theron choked. Then it will be mutual destruction, but you will be dead first. Through the bond, Eloan felt his rage, white-hot and all-consuming. He would start a war to protect her. Kyle, stop! Whether he heard her or sensed her through their connection, his eyes snapped to her face. Please, she whispered, there has to be another way. For an eternal moment nothing moved. Then Kale released Theron, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. You have until dawn to leave my territory, Kale said. After that, you will be killed on sight. Theron stumbled to his feet, his face twisted with hatred. This isn't over, cousin. His golden eyes fixed on Eloan. And as for your human pet, she won't survive the mark. She'll be dead within a fortnight, and you'll be alone again. He swept from the hall with his wolves behind him. Kale turned to Eloan, and the fury in his eyes gave way to dread. The mark, he whispered. Eloan, I never meant... I didn't know it would... I know. She took his hand, feeling his fear pulse through the bond. I know. Around them, the wolves of Valdron watched in stunned silence. Their alpha's secrets had been exposed, his mate revealed. And Eloan stood at the center of it all, with a death sentence written on her throat, and her heart bound to a man she barely knew. But somehow, impossibly, she wasn't afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 days passed and Eloan began to die. It started slowly, a tremor in her hands, a chill that wouldn't fade. Then came the fever, burning through her body in waves that left her gasping and drenched in sweat. Kale never left her side. He carried her to his chambers when her legs gave out, held her through the long nights when pain turned her cries into whimpers. Through the bond, she felt his anguish, his guilt, his fierce love. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I didn't know. I didn't think. You couldn't have known, she managed through cracked lips. I should have controlled myself. I should have... Kale. She found his hand, gripped it with what little strength remained. I don't regret it. I don't regret you. His lips pressed against her temple, and she felt the wetness of his tears. On the 4th day, Marin came with news. There may be a way, she said heavily, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than doing nothing. Kale's head snapped up. Tell me. The old texts speak of a ritual. When a human cannot contain the wolf's essence, sometimes the transformation can be completed. The human becomes wolf. Hope flared in Kale's eyes, but Marin raised her hand. The transformation breaks every bone, reshapes every muscle. 1 in 10 humans survive, maybe less. No. Kyle's voice was sharp. I won't risk her. It's not your choice. Both of them turned to stare at Eloan, who had pushed herself upright despite the agony. It's my life, she said. My choice. Eloan, if I do nothing, I die. Slowly, watching you suffer through the bond with every breath. She reached for his face, her palm resting against his scarred cheek. I won't do that to you. I won't do that to us. And if you die in the transformation, then at least I died fighting. At least I died trying to stay with you. Kale closed his eyes. Through their connection, she felt him wrestling with dread and hope, and a love so vast it overwhelmed them both. When, he finally asked. Tonight. The full moon, it's the only time. Elowen felt his arms tighten around her. Then tonight, she whispered, I become yours completely. Or I die trying. The ritual chamber lay deep beneath the fortress, carved from living rock centuries ago. Ancient symbols covered the stone floor. The full moon's light streamed through a circular opening in the ceiling, bathing a raised altar in silver luminescence. Elowen stood at the entrance, dressed in simple white linen, her bare feet cold against the stone. You can still change your mind, Kyle said behind her. I won't. She turned to face him, rising on her toes to press her lips against his. I love you, she said. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know that. I love you, Kyle of Valdron, not the Alpha King. You. The man who held me through the pain. The man who sees me as everything when the world sees me as nothing. His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized she was crying. I love you, he whispered back. My mate. My heart. My everything. Then Marin guided her toward the altar. Lie down. When the moon peaks, the transformation begins. You must not fight it. Let the wolf in, no matter how much it hurts. Elowen positioned herself on the cold stone, staring up at the night sky. Stars glittered around the moon like diamonds. Kale, she called softly. He was beside her instantly, his hand finding hers. Don't let go, she whispered. Whatever happens. Never. The moonlight intensified and something ancient awakened in her blood. Then the pain began. It was worse than anything she had imagined. Every bone shattered and reformed. Every muscle tore itself apart and knit back together. Her spine arched off the altar as a scream ripped from her throat, a sound that wasn't quite human anymore. Through it all, Kale held her hand. She felt his fear through the bond, felt him fighting the urge to stop the ritual. But he stayed. His love was an anchor in the storm. Stay with me, he begged. Elowen, please. She tried to answer, but her jaw was changing. Words became impossible. The world narrowed to sensation, pain and moonlight and his iron grip. Let it in, Marin had said. Don't fight it. But every instinct screamed to resist, to cling to her humanity. I can't, she thought. I'm not strong enough. You are. The voice came from deep inside, somewhere ancient and primal. You have always been strong, it said. You survived your father's death. You cared for your mother when no one else would. You walked into a fortress of wolves with nothing but courage. You stood before an Alpha King and saw the man beneath the crown. You are not weak, Elowen Ashford. You are a survivor. Now survive this. Something shifted inside her. Instead of fighting the pain, she surrendered to it. Instead of resisting the wolf, she welcomed it. The two halves of herself stopped warring and began to merge, weaving together into something new, something whole. The agony peaked, and her world went white. When she opened her eyes, everything was different. Colors were brighter. Sounds rang crystal clear. She could smell the torch smoke, the ancient stone, and kale, pine and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. She looked down and found paws. Silver-white fur covered her body, gleaming in the moonlight. She had done it. She had become wolf. Elowen, Kale's voice echoed through the bond, filled with wonder and relief. She turned to find him kneeling beside the altar, tears streaming down his face. You're alive. You're beautiful. She pressed her muzzle against his hand, and he laughed, a broken, joyful sound. My mate, he whispered. My perfect, impossible mate. The wolves around the chamber gathered in a circle. Cormac stepped forward. The human has survived the change. She has proven herself worthy, but the bond remains incomplete. His eyes met Kyle's. For a true mating, the claim must be mutual. Elowen understood. Kale had marked her, but she had never marked him. Their bond was one-sided. Kyle stood slowly, his winter-pale eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to," he said softly. "If you want to walk away, I'll release the bond. I'll let you go." Why would I ever want to go? The thought pulsed through their connection, and his breath caught. "You are my home. You are my heart. You are everything I never knew I was looking for." She shifted. The transformation was smoother this time. One moment wolf. The next, she stood before him in human form, her silver-white hair cascading down her back, a mark of the change she had undergone. She reached for him, pulling him close. She kissed him once, softly. Then her lips trailed down his jaw, along the column of his throat, finding the place where his pulse beat strong and steady. "Mine," she whispered against his flesh, and she bit down. Kale's roar shook the chamber, his arms wrapped around her as the bond exploded into completion. Their minds crashed together, his emotions flooding through her, hers pouring into him. They were one. When she finally released him, they stood wrapped in each other, breathing each other's air, lost in the perfection of their connection. Around them, the wolves of Valdron howled. Cormac's voice rang out above the chorus. "All hail the Alpha King and his mate! All hail the Queen of Valdron!" The howls intensified, rising toward the moon. Kale cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with tears. "My queen," he said, "my mate, my heart." Elowen smiled, feeling the wolf beneath her skin settle into contentment. "My king," she replied, "my alpha, my everything." He kissed her then, in front of his pack, under the light of the full moon. And Elowen knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not as a maid, not as an outsider, as a queen, as a wolf, as his. 6 months later, Elowen stood on the fortress ramparts, watching the sun rise over the mountains of Valdron. Much had changed. Theron had returned with an army, just as promised. But he had underestimated the bond between the Alpha King and his mate. Elowen had fought beside Kale, silver-white wolf to his massive black one, and together they had broken Blackmore's forces. Theron was dead now, killed by Kale's claws when he had tried to strike Elowen from behind. The secret of Kale's deafness no longer mattered. His wolves had seen their alpha lead them to victory, had witnessed the strength that had nothing to do with hearing and everything to do with heart. They followed him more loyally than ever, and Elowen's mother, she had been brought to Valdron, given the finest healers and medicines the pack could provide. She was recovering slowly, surrounded by the care her daughter's new position could offer. "You're thinking too hard." Kale's arms wrapped around her from behind, and Elowen leaned back into his warmth. "I'm thinking about how far we've come." Through the bond, she felt his contentment, his love, his quiet wonder that this was his life now. "Any regrets?" he asked. Elowen turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. Not a single one. Below them, the fortress stirred to life. Wolves emerged from doorways, children laughed in the courtyard, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchens. Home, Elowen thought. This is home. And with her mate's arms around her and her pack spread out below, she knew she would never want for anything else. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. A big thank you to everyone who's following. Your support truly means the world to me.